examination into the nature and into the character of John the Baptist leaves us with the impression of the authors, leaves us with the impression of the writers. We can take whatever we're reading and imagine whatever we want to imagine. We can do that. We can do that. Free reign, free roam, have fun with that. But to actually and sincerely dig self into what is actually going on into the scriptures for a purpose that is beyond imagination, sensual stimulus, sensual religious stimulus, sensual irreligious stimulus, to actually purge from the garden the dress and the addressing that is necessary. It means to actually think, but then think like the author. Think like the author. If we are not able to do that, we're going to be in an imaginary realm of what we opine. And let that be what that will be our rest. But for the inquisitive mind and the mind that wants to move beyond the general rest that is given to the disposition of devotional characters from the input of the blueprint of the religious world, or from the input of self-cultivated doctrine taken from the religious world, to look at what is going on, not just in the book of Mark or in the book of Luke, from Genesis to Malachi, from Malachi to Revelation, looking at these things the way the authors would. That's strict exercise. That's educational learning. That's higher educational learning. And for the sake of our devotional conversations, growth and development, something that we should care to do. This inquiry of exercising self within the garden. That's where all of this inquiry is coming from concerning John and concerning it all. We are doing what was told to the pair in the garden. They failed to do it. Well, as we're going along and seeing what's happening with the John character, we're seeing what that failure can amount to. The more that we can fail to not give time and place to exercising the conscience of our devotional character, to the conscience of our belief, well, the more that we are going to opine and drift away into the sea of opinions while at it. We will miss the point. We will miss the point. We will miss the structure in the construct that the authors are writing with to lay the message within it. And when exercising mind over the character John, we stumble upon something interesting, because this John character, this John is not an actual person. This name is not even actually given to a person. This is like how we find a dead person and call them John Doe or Jane Doe. That's what this John is. This is a John, unknown to history, but known to the author. And we can understand how they know them due to the construct that they frame around them, the narrative that they place around them from Old Testament references. And what they place around this John is a character construct of the creation of a religion and of the promotion and marketing of such by a throne that they are connected to. Gone through the illustration, I'm not going to do that here. But what I will do here, what we will get into here, is how religion is actually created, how it moves. And we're going to see a connection between how religion is created, how it moves, and the character John. All of these things, they're not accidental. And when looking at John, when seeing how the author breaks down, and I should say authors break down, we're seeing history. We're seeing history covered by a work of very intelligent fiction. They're hiding identities, but they are not actually hiding roles. Identities are hidden. Let that be. But the role of the actual identity, it is shown. And when we look at John, we're seeing someone that was tailored, someone that was hired to not simply invent a religion or create, but to dispense with it. They were given the seed, And from that seed, they were supposed to, and they did, properly dispense with it, and at a point in time, to draw conflict away from an agent or from an assembly onto what they hold to be valid for the times and for the age. What is the paradigm concerning how religions are created? What's the paradigm? What's the paradigm? And before getting into that genre, I want to show how that paradigm finds itself established in history. Looking in the Kings. 2 Kings 16, 10, and 11. And King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saw an altar that was at Damascus, and King Ahaz sent to Uriah the priest the fashion of the altar and the pattern of it, according to all the workmanship thereof. Uriah the priest built an altar according to all that King Ahaz had sent from Damascus. So Uriah the priest made it against King Ahaz, came from Damascus. So this is the blueprint. The blueprint is king gets vision of religion. King sends vision of religion to chief/prime priest. Chief/prime priest takes vision, makes it into something that is to be worshipped. King going to collect what has been fashioned and created by chief/prime priest, gets rid of religion, the previous religion, blacks it out, blots it out, deletes it, so that only theirs is the most prominent. Now that second part, the Kings didn't go into that, but the Chronicles do. 2 Chronicles 28, 22 to 25. And in the time of his distress, did he trespass yet more against the Lord? This is that King Ahaz. For he sacrificed unto the gods of Damascus, which smote him. He said, because the gods of the kings of Syria help them, therefore will I sacrifice to them, that they may help me. But they were the ruin of him and of all Israel. And Ahaz gathered together the vessels of the house of God, cut in pieces the vessels of the house of God, shut up the doors of the house of God. He made him altars in every corner of Jerusalem. And in every several city of Judah he made high places to burn incense unto other gods, and provoke to anger the Lord God of his fathers. This is the paradigm. The paradigm is king gets vision, vision gets sent to chief/prime priest, chief/prime priest creates religion, king receives that religion and deletes the one from behind it, the one before it, so that the only thing in remembrance is the new one that has been concocted from his imagination or from the vision that he received, however he received that. Let's see this in history. Another important serapeum was built at Alexandria, the new Ptolemaic capital. When Ptolemy first Soter wanted to select an official god for Egypt, he chose Serapis, ordering his architect to design what became one of the largest and best known of the god's temples. There Serapis was worshipped in a purely Greek ritual until AD 391, when the Serapeum was destroyed by the patriarch Theophilus and his followers. In Roman times, other Serapeums were constructed throughout the empire. Just want to point out that pattern again. King creates God. King gives God to architect. Architect structure, however many years later, gets destroyed by the new and emerging religion to have it replaced by that new and emerging religion's deity. Continuing, the Serapeum, dedicated to the worship of the gods Serapis and Isis, was traditionally associated with the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt and with the Pharaonic and later Roman imperial cult. The destruction of this religious and cultural complex by a Christian mob acting under the direction of local Bishop Theophilus was a deliberate act of vandalism intended to demonstrate the greater power of the Christian God over his spiritual competitors. In addition, the destruction of this famous sanctuary was undertaken with the approval of the reigning emperor, signaling a change in the locus of sacred authority in the Roman world, as Roman emperors were now abandoning traditional Pharaonic and Hellenistic models of divine kingship by ceding spiritual authority to Christian bishops. Again, history is only doing what it's supposed to do. Whether it is King Ahaz doing it, whether it is the Christian emperor doing it, whether it's the Roman emperor doing it, history is repeating. This is how religion works. And the makeup, and I'm pointing all of this out specifically, of that chief/prime priest that takes the vision and becomes the architect, becomes the messenger, becomes the minister, this priest, this Uriah by name, this General Uriah, doing what the general king will have. This is something that is played out throughout history, and this is something that the author of Mark and the author of Luke, the authors altogether of the Gospels, especially the Acts, they assign to that John. That John in reality is a chief/prime priest of a throne. That's why the author of Mark, in their dialogue with that John and that Herod, ascribed to that John the character traits from the scenes of Daniel and Esther. The scenes between Herod and that John are scenes taken from the past because the author is making a connection, a parallel to the past. In reality, that John represents what those past characters represent. That's why they have placed into their dialogue those characters and the stream of thought that flows with them in there.
A Fallen Record, The Christian Transgression, is a book bringing history and the Bible together. We all want to know how the Christian religion began. But does the Bible show error occurring in the early church? This book looks at the origin of the Christian movement, and in a way where philosophical context is shown from the Bible. Learn Christian history from the narrative given by the Bible, and learn how the Bible shows the Christian religion taking another path. In A Fallen Record, The Christian Transgression.
Every instance concerning the John character, it begins with Mark, who sets the trend. Every narrative thereafter builds upon the trend, adding to the character. When we see the character as mapped out by Mark, we are seeing him as a Daniel, a chief/prime priest to the throne. We are seeing him as a Haman, one second in command, and also one who has his head inevitably taken from him. Haman is hanged. Haman's head is taken from him. We see him as a devourer of locusts, by a particular west wind or by a particular doctrine of the Western world. Which doctrine of the Western world is universal? This is the doctrine of Serapis. And we're seeing him as hailing a king royally, with full majesty. The scene of the latchet and the shoes confess this. What we're actually seeing when we're seeing this John character, we're seeing a priest who is sectioned out for a particular work, for a particular job of promoting a particular religion endorsed by a throne. This is not something that is strange, maybe strange to us, but to the world back then, to the culture back then, to the context back then, this was life. And it wasn't life for normal people, it was life for the elites. Serapis did not appear in any ancient myth. No Greek author of the classical period mentioned him. He appeared in scattered documents in the 4th century BC and reached his peak popularity in the 3rd century BC. The most widely accepted and detailed accounts of the origins of Serapis originated from the Roman period. In histories, Tacitus wrote of Ptolemy having a dream in which a handsome youth appeared to him in his sleep and bid him to bring his image from Pontus to Egypt. To help him understand his dream and identify the young man, Ptolemy consulted Timotheus. This is a name that we should be familiar with, an Athenian whom he brought to Egypt to supervise the sacred rites. Timotheus informed Ptolemy that the city of Sinope in Pontus featured a temple dedicated to Pluto. Ptolemy, caught up in his leisurely life, forgot about the affair until the apparition appeared again in the dream. This time the handsome youth threatened Ptolemy, warning that if Ptolemy did not bring his statue from Egypt, the kingdom would fall to ruin. Ptolemy soon sent an embassy to Sinope to retrieve the statue. The king of Sinope resisted giving up the statue. However, after a while, the statue somehow, on its own, boarded a ship bound for Egypt. Plutarch gave a similar account of the dream. When the statue arrived in Alexandria, a priest identified the likeness with that of Pluto, whom the Egyptians called Serapis. The priest likewise convinced Ptolemy to worship the statue as Serapis. Plutarch writes, "It certainly did not bear this name when it came from Sinope, but after it had been conveyed to Alexandria, it took to itself the name which Pluto bears among the Egyptians, that of Serapis." As Roman sources, these texts did not exist until long after the period in question, leaving scholars unable to count them as fully reliable first-hand accounts. Nevertheless, most scholars agree on the general conclusion that a statue brought to Alexandria during the early years of Ptolemaic rule established the Serapis cult there. Same trend. Still gonna keep reading. Recognizing their Osiris in Serapis, the Egyptians readily accepted the new cult. There was a tradition that a new dynasty should introduce a new god or give a sort of preeminence to the god of its own district. From time immemorial, politics had changed the government of heaven when changing that of earth. Now that's important. From time immemorial, politics had changed the government of heaven when changing that of earth. Under the Ptolemies, the Serapis of Alexandria naturally became one of the principal divinities of the country, just as the Ammon of Thebes had been the chief of the celestial hierarchy under the pharaohs of that city, or as under the sovereigns from Sais, the local Naif had the primacy. At the time of the Antoines, there were 42 Serapiums in Egypt. But the purpose of the Ptolemies was not to add one more Egyptian god to the countless number already worshipped by the subjects. They wanted this god to unite in one common worship the two races inhabiting the kingdom, and thus to further a complete fusion. The Greeks were obliged to worship him side by side with the natives. It was a clever political idea to institute a Hellenized Egyptian religion at Alexandria. A tradition mentioned by Plutarch has it that Manetho, a priest from Heliopolis, a man of advanced ideas, together with Timotheus, Eumolpid from Eleusis, thought out the character that would best suit the newcomer. The result was that the composite religion became a combination of the old creed of the pharaohs and the Greek mysteries. So there we have it. You've got Manetho and you've got Timotheus doing the work of Uriah. You've got the king receiving their vision, however they receive their vision of their deity, and put in place by the priests closest to them. Bible illustration has this, but the Bible is a book of history. And not simply history, it's not history as in secular, it's history as in repeating ecclesiastical history. What we're seeing in the Bible, we will find it in real life as we're here seeing. The author writing the book of Mark, they set their John up by the way that they characterize him and structure him as a Uriah, as a Timotheus, as a Manetho. This is very evident. This is very evident from the things that they're giving us, what they're doing. This is an interesting thought, because once you get into the book of Luke, the characters, just as in the book of Mark or in the book of John, the characters creatively take on the angles of the authors. Mark establishes the founding trend of these characters. Mark builds them. And when you get into the book of Luke now, what's the background of John when you enter into the book of Luke? Do you remember the background of John? Because this is not in the book of Mark. Nowhere in the book of Mark is John's background given, yet it is given. Through the references that the author of Mark cites, the author of Luke already understands the narrative of the identity concerning that John, so they really find it not so difficult to script the background of John now. When we enter into Luke, we learn that John, his background, his family is from a notable priesthood. Why? Why? Why is that necessary? That's nowhere in the book of Mark, for which all of this begins every trend for. Why is it necessary? Why does the author of Luke find it necessary to then cite that John as having a background whose family is from a notable priesthood. Could it be that that's just the reality? And that's actually the reality that is cited in the original doctrine, or I should say in the first Mark. It's originally cited in Mark figuratively. It's not blatantly cited. It's figuratively cited because the author is taking in the book of Mark passages from the Old Testament and they're placing it into their John to let the character of that John build through the citations. The author of Luke understands the citations. That's why they begin their John as dawning from a priesthood. They state their John as dawning from a priesthood. That's really interesting. And yet, when you look at the way that Mark puts things together, and then when you look at the way that the Uriahs of the world work, well, you can actually see the trend. You can actually see what these authors are trying to tell us by placing their characters into the order that they're placing them in. You see John dawns from a notable priesthood. John himself is noted as being the priest prophet of the highest. Luke 1:76. And thou, child, shalt be called the prophet of the highest, for thou shalt go before the face of the Lord to prepare his ways. See, these authors already know. The only ones that are slow to catch up are the ones that should inherit the documents after. Because by that time, the initial construct, the initial patterns, the initial everything that was established by the groups of the ones that are writing this, once they get released into the public, they don't become documents that are known. They become documents that are unknown. And then these unknown documents, they're received and things are put on them. Different groups from different mindsets put their things on them, spreads, builds up, spreads, builds up, spreads, and then builds up until in 2024, we have an unrecognizable document in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the only thing recognizable is recognizable to the individual person whose imagination fixes to whatever they want to it because it suits their religious experience and their individual theory for where they would incline their mind toward. When in reality, there is an underlying literary scheme with a literary pattern full of literary history that is going into Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the Acts that have a philosophy and an encoded message within them for the individual that should receive them, for the individual that should study them, for the individual that should plunge into them. And beginning all of this is that John who in reality is a priest, who as a priest in reality is forwarding a religion given to him by the vision of a throne. This is well established from the book of Mark. And in the book of Luke, this is actually taken to another level, same level that is encoded in the book of Mark, but the author of the book of Luke, they have their own encoded vision for it. And in that encoded vision, they don't deviate from Mark. Although it may seem like it, Mark isn't so blatant. Author of Luke is, because Mark has already given the references. They're simply just amending the illusion.
What is the Sabbath of the Bible? In the Bible Sabbath, you'll embark on a captivating journey through the ancient wisdom of the Sabbath, a day of rest and reflection, as described in the Holy Scriptures. Inside of these pages you'll discover a fascinating exploration of the philosophical significance of the seventh day, insights into how the day of rest can improve your well-being and mental clarity, tips on how to incorporate the Bible's rest into your devotional experience. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity to rediscover the essence of your faith itself. Your gateway to a devotional life of peace, purpose, and profound joy is waiting. Get your copy now and embrace the gift of the Sabbath.
These narratives get really interesting when you allow them to speak. When you allow them to speak, they really really become fascinating. John is supposed to be the prophet of the highest. I mean, the author is already giving us the answer. We don't know history. We don't know history, or we don't know how things work. Even though we have the example of Ahaz, it's never going to make a connection to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have history. It's never going to make a connection to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John unless we're able to get in and to decode the references and the illustrations that the authors are using. John is supposed to be the prophet of the highest. Now, is the highest a deity? Is the highest a deity? If we had to think like the author, is the highest actually a deity? Into the book of Luke. Luke 1:32, and he shall be great, and shall be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father, David. Now, who does the throne of David belong to? Does the throne of David, who does it belong to? Is the throne of David actually David's? Is the throne of David actually David's? When that Son of the Highest receives the throne of David, what's really being received? 1 Chronicles 29:23. Then Solomon sat on the throne of the Lord as king instead of David his father, and prospered, and all Israel obeyed him. So I want to pay attention to who owns this throne. Who owns this throne despite the individual sitting on it? Solomon is there, yes, but who owns the throne? Solomon sat on the throne, doesn't say of Israel. Solomon sat on the throne of the Lord, of their deity. Solomon sat on the throne of their deity. Who owns the throne? Their deity. Their deity owns the throne. Whoever is sitting on that throne, they are sitting on the throne of the deity. There is a throne above. There is a throne below. The throne above belongs to the one that they call their almighty deity. The one below belongs to the one that they call their almighty deity. Only difference is the one sitting on that throne, they are sitting on the throne of the highest. That's what makes the highest important. Looking at 1 Chronicles 28 and verse 5. And all of my sons, for the Lord hath given me many sons, he hath chosen, and of all my sons, for the Lord hath given me many sons, he hath chosen Solomon my son to sit upon the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. Read that again. My son to sit upon the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. There's a lot there, but in essence, the kingdom is the kingdom of the deities. The throne is the throne of the deities. The one sitting on that throne, they are sitting on the earthly throne of the deity. And let me just say this. In the book of Mark, in the 2nd chapter, when the individual came and through the roof and they said, he is here, I will forgive your sins. To let you know the Son of Man can forgive sins, let me just do this for you real quick. They said, who can forgive sins but God? Does God forgive sins? Staying in the Bible. Maybe we don't know this. I've placed this out there on countless times. Does God actually forgive sins? The answer is, which one? Because in the mythology, from Genesis to Malachi, there is one on the throne, this Almighty, and there is a high priest next to this Almighty that collects prayers. This is a theme concerning the mythology from Genesis to Malachi. The one that is on this throne does not forgive sins because they have a high priest that forgives sins. When David is sitting on this throne, when Solomon is sitting on this throne, they're not sitting as a priest king. That absolutely violates the general philosophy from Genesis to Malachi. Because the general philosophy from Genesis to Malachi includes a mythology explaining the layout concerning the general philosophy from Genesis to Malachi. So this individual that is sitting on this throne of the kingdom of the Lord, they're not sitting as king and priest because what is above was scripted so that what is below could mirror it. The ones sitting on this throne, they are, in essence, a representative of the highest. They are, in essence, the representative of the highest. And as representative of the highest, the one that sits on this throne, the one that actually sits on this throne, they are the ones that are to be considered as quote-unquote God. This theme and this figurative illustration carries over into the book of Luke, to where the Son of the Highest and to where the highest, they are not what we would think according to the narrative, because John is not what we would think according to the narrative. John is the prophet of the highest. The highest is the one that is actually sitting on the throne. Who is sitting on the throne at this time? This is a Herodian throne. John is the prophet, if I could just say this plainly, of which this evidence within these narratives, Mark beginning all of this, begins this trend. This John character is a prophet of the Herodian throne.